To today's video. Today is Saturday, February 15th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Donald Trump's appointments and the impact it might be having on Donald Trump's presidency and the American public and how they perceive the President of the United States and those in his cabinet, including Vice President J.D. Vance, and what it might mean for Republicans and Democrats across the country as some interesting special elections arise, 2025, 2026, and yes, even 2028. The early stages of an administration often set the tone for how the rest of the 3.5 years will go. And given we are less than 1 month into it, a lot has happened. Recently this week, I'm not sure if you have your news alerts turned off or on because there's a lot that is happening, but also a lot that people simply are getting bombarded with time and time again. A lot of news coming out of this second administration for the incumbent president. RFK Jr. confirmed, Tulsi Gabbard confirmed, in a major move for Kash Patel, Donald Trump's pick for director of the FBI here, making a move out of the Senate panel, moving straight to a confirmation vote, which will likely vote down by party lines, barring 1 or 2 Republican objections that will ultimately lead to eventually the nomination and confirmation of Kash Patel in the executive cabinet. Now, all of this news comes at the time where we see the firing of NIH workers, the end of DEI in the civil service as we know it, and all of these different conversations that are being had and decisions that are being had well within 8 to 12 hours, the news finding out something might happen and it eventually happening either through an executive order or some type of internal executive authority that Donald Trump has. And a lot of it has been really all-consuming. I mean, the amount of news that has come out of this administration has arguably been more than I've ever seen for the Obama admin, for the first Trump admin, for the Biden administration. I mean, we are talking about massive changes to the way that the federal government is structured, major decisions that are being made. I mean, at different points in time, these are things that happened, not necessarily with just, the stroke of a pen in the first admin that are now happening with the stroke of a pen, if not less. And the involvement of Elon Musk into government proceedings and all of this different, different news coverage from left, right, and center media talking about the influence of different people on the way that Donald Trump leads this administration. I mean, all of it seems to be something that is going to be eventually damaging to Donald Trump's administration. Now, we know that this presidency is different than the first one for Donald Trump and arguably is a different period of time for Donald Trump in totality. For the first time ever, his favorability rating has narrowed to a point where it is well within the margin of error of being that Donald Trump could be, given that the polls might swing just a point tomorrow, more favored than unfavored. Now, that matters for a variety of different reasons. When people like a presidential candidate, or in this case, a president, they often excuse the behaviors of said presidential candidate or president. Remind me of 2015. The Republican primary, 17 major candidates, larger names than Donald Trump, who had all vied for this presidential bid, sometimes not only this election, but in years past, 2012, 2008, 2004. Big names that had built up an extensive amount of political capital that went after Donald Trump. And Donald Trump didn't start off too hot. People didn't really gravitate to his, to what he was saying, to what he was doing until about a month or 2 months into his campaign. He was polling in some cases at 1 or 2% nationwide. And that matters, right? Because Donald Trump came into it with a very low approval rating amongst everybody. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, nobody liked him. And as he won over the Republican electorate closer and closer to the election, and then very much after the electorate, it was that for Donald Trump amongst the mainstream GOP, the turned mainstream GOP, what was Romney era and McCain era became MAGA era, excused his behavior. So why did that matter? Well, what might have been perceived as irreconcilable for Democrats and really unnerving for independents, in many cases was adored and respected by the Republican base. It won him primary after primary and eventually won him the general election as independents changed their view of him. Then came the second time Donald Trump wanted to run. He didn't start off too hot after January 6th, but that's because his approval rating amongst Republicans, Independents, and Democrats was at record low. And as more and more of his policies and the way that he was campaigning was changing the national perception on him, he made it to Election Day, November 3rd, 5th, 2024, with just an 8.6% delta between unfavorable and favorable, which, although not as good as Kamala Harris's, was much closer than when he started off at this presidential bid at the end of 2022 with about a 16-point delta. After all, a huge chunk of the country had simply changed their mind about Donald Trump, and that made a huge difference through the election. But it didn't end there. The reason I tell you this is because the Trump campaign and the coordinated effort of the White House has made it their intentional focus to change the way the public perceives the incumbent president. So as they got closer to the inauguration, they put Donald Trump more out there. They made him do media hits. They continued this winning strategy that got them through the general election and led them to Inauguration Day on Inauguration Day at an unfavorability rating of just 47.9%, the lowest it had ever been for Donald Trump in United States history. It is this change of public opinion that makes equal amounts of Americans like and dislike him, that permits him to do things like this, that might have been huge negatives on his campaign and his overall standing amongst the public in 2017. That is directly in line with what was damaging to him in the 2020 election. Nominating extremists to the cabinet was something he was slammed on. The Brett Kavanaugh appointment to the Supreme Court was something he was slammed on. Well, this is far, bigger in significance in the sense that this is happening not just, one situation where there's an entire Senate holdup around a Supreme Court nominee who's been accused of some very, very heinous things. It is the fact that this is now happening to every single cabinet appointee, not every single, right? That's, I guess, too extreme to say that, but a number of the members of Congress who have now been appointed, former cabinet officials, former Democrats, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Kash Patel. I mean, you're talking about a substantive amount of people who are receiving multiple things that are alarming, that would have been really difficult for the American public to even get behind on the Republican side in 2017, in 2018, in 2019, in 2020, that now is steamrolling through the United States Senate. And so, in terms of electoral significance, let's talk about it. Well, for one, Donald Trump's approval rating is only high because the American public likes him. And I know that sounds weird to say, right? But they like him as a person far more than they ever did, which means his buffer is right around 46%. It is very expected that an approval rating of a president, when it's Donald Trump, this really is particular to him, where you can dislike Trump as a person, but love his policies. And there were plenty of voters out there in the first term. After all, this favorability rating was often, at a lower point than his approval rating. Right before the 2020 election, nearly 45% of the country said, I approve of Donald Trump as president. And sure, he got more than 45% of the vote, but his favorability rating numbers were hovering around 39-40%. In the beginning of his administration, the plurality of the country approved of the job that Donald Trump was doing. That didn't mean that his favorability rating was record high. In fact, it was just on par with where it was after he won the 2016 election, down by double digits. Again, the change in the way that the American public perceives Donald Trump has allowed this approval rating to hold strong, which means that a lot of the things that Democrats, I think, see as, major hitting points for Trump are not going to be major hitting points right now. They are not going to land on the American public's ears the same way they did in the first term, because the voters saw the first term. They saw Biden's term. Then they decided to re-elect Donald Trump by a margin larger than they ever had voted for a Republican in the 21st century before. Democrats have to keep that in mind. And I do think, too, looking at this, I absolutely think that these are bad decisions objectively, just looking at it from Tulsi Gabbard has flip-flopped back and forth, arguably, for a better portion of her time in the political spotlight. Somebody who 4 years ago was making a video endorsing Joe Biden, saying we need to defeat Donald Trump, 4 years later, running to say, I'm endorsing Trump and now being the director of national intelligence. You also find RFK Jr., who a year ago you would have found on the campaign trail trying to primary Joe Biden, saying, we need to defeat Donald Trump, but the only person who can do that is me and not Joe Biden. Well, guess what? Endorses Biden. All of these people, I would say, simply do not have the genuine nature of conservative politics in their minds. I think they are loyal to Trump, but that doesn't always mean they're going to do stuff that Donald Trump wants them to do, nor do I think they have the fundamental beliefs or the fundamental mindset to enact some of the policies that Donald Trump would like them to do. Eventually, these people will be snubbed out of the administration, or they'll be rendered useless as political appointees. Yes, it makes a big deal that RFK Jr. made it through, but largely put, there are plenty of way more qualified doctors, medical professionals who could have fit the HHS position far better than RFK Jr. but Donald Trump had to reward him for his political endorsement that arguably helped him win the 2024 election. And that RFK Jr. endorsement propelled Trump, and Donald Trump paid the favor back. Same thing with Tulsi Gabbard. And so I think about these things. While I do think, on one end, I'm not shocked that Trump appointed these people and that they made it through a Republican Senate, but I do think there will be negative repercussions in the years to come. I don't think it'll happen just now. And I think this is what is unlike the day and age of Donald Trump's first term, was that everything was bad under Trump. The media covered things in a very negative way, arguably because a lot was happening. Donald Trump's, cabinet made a complete 180. Way more people were overturned. There was a huge, crap show in the beginning of the Trump administration. This time they have things down. Much more loyal staff, much more loyal cabinet appointees. And I know we're less than a month in, but you can start to feel that things are different. But the impact on the American public will be felt. The impact of these random tariffs on countries like Colombia and Mexico and Canada, and the decisions to do those and then withdraw them, and all this confusion and all this, negative media coverage is not going to help Donald Trump maintain this honeymoon period. Joe Biden was still, more liked than disliked nationwide for half a year in the beginning of his presidency. Donald Trump might last just a few more weeks. Now, I do think it is impressive for Donald Trump, regardless, that he's been able to keep his favorability rating here, that he's been able to keep his approval rating at 49%. But this is a slippery slope. Donald Trump did not start out as approved of as Joe Biden or Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Bill Clinton. Donald Trump in his own right has been uniquely unpopular for the past decade that he has been known in American politics. And even with this sudden rise, he's still more unfavorable than he is favorable, even though it's within the margin of error. And so I will say this. As these cabinet nominations and these confirmations come in, what might feel apocalyptic for Democrats to seemingly have no effect on the Republican Party today, it will eventually be felt. It is the same thing that we've seen in presidential politics for a very long time. What might be nice and approved of now may not be in 3 to 4 years' time. After all, Joe Biden won the 2020 election against the same person who beat his vice president 4 years later. The stories don't often, write themselves well. Things can really change for incumbent presidents, incumbent vice presidents, and many members of the cabinet in simply 24 hours in the American political universe. And so I will be interested to watch to see how some of these decisions around Donald Trump's recent executive order to defund public schools that mandate child vaccines, the recent decisions around the firing of all temporary employees at the NIH and freezing cancer research funding, as more and more of these things become more felt by the American public. As with the USAID closure across the world, we've started to see the direct impact, the direct feeling of those office closures, health clinics, all of these different things that were used as foreign aid by the American public, by the American government to participate in this overall mission towards global peace and global stability. As these things begin to be felt, as people begin to complain about the rise of egg prices, even though they're not directly to blame for Donald Trump or really anybody in particular, it is the same case as inflation or COVID, where the incumbent president is often going to be the one who is blamed for all of these decisions. Donald Trump is not immune to that. While what seems to have been immune to him is the media coverage and the Democrats spending 8 years going after him just to lose the 2024 election, he has no more elections to run in. And that means it'll be people like J.D. Vance or Donald Trump Jr., or Elise Stefanik, or the laundry list of other Republicans who want to run for president in 2028, who will have to defend this record, because this record will speak for itself. Donald Trump is uniquely immune to a lot of the things that many of these other Republicans are not. That's why you see J.D. Vance disapproved of more than Donald Trump. That's why you see many of these other Republicans who try to replicate the Trump playbook in swing states like Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, or Herschel Walker in Georgia, or Kari Lake in Arizona. People who try to embody the incumbent president that just simply can't do it right, because nobody is better than Donald Trump himself at encapsulating the way that Donald Trump feels, acts, and engages with the public, with the media, with politicians. He is his own person. And as much as it does seem very painful, I think, for Democrats to really reconcile with, is that Donald Trump is a once-in-a-generation candidate, and there probably won't be many more people like him. Same thing with Obama, as the same thing is with Trump. He has a unique ability to spin the news and the narrative in a way that is very beneficial for him and his administration. That's why with all of this craziness, so it seems, the news alerts I get do objectively seem like there is a lot more happening in this administration than the last one. And that isn't always a good thing. That the American public has not budged in approval. While it may have narrowed, right, from 8 points to 3 points, the honeymoon period was only going to last so far. But as long as Donald Trump is outrunning his first term, doing far more executive authorities, right, whether that's an executive order or changing up what's happening amongst, the bureaucrats across the federal government, Donald Trump has supreme authority on the executive branch. And he is using it in ways we have never seen before, and yet the public is not reacting in the way they did prior to. So that will be the main task for Democrats. It will be very interesting to watch how this impacts not only present-day viewing of Trump, but also historical viewing of Trump in 5 to 10 years, and the future Republican and Democratic nominees across state legislative races, governor races, House races, Senate races, and of course, the next presidential race. Because this will be an interesting legacy to defend, and it will be one that will be largely associated with Donald Trump's version of the GOP, which right now seems to be the only version of the Republican Party for now. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the top right of the screen, there's also a video for you to watch and a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.